BB448, brothers and sisters, welcome to another edition of the African Liberation Media Show. I'm your host, Brother Amos, here with my esteemed elder, Baba Makaru. How you doing, Baba Makaru?
Hey, every day is a blessing, brother. Every day is a blessing.
Ashe. So we're here tonight to discuss the recent controversial, or what the West is calling controversial, Anti Homosexuality Act 2023 that was passed in Uganda. And a lot of people had initial reactions to this bill being passed and called it a draconian type of law that was passed against the Ugandan citizens. And when we look at this and we look at it from a perspective of non-Ugandan citizens, uh, I'm not really looking into this from the aspect of my personal opinion on the issue itself. My perspective is looking at this from a position as Uganda being a sovereign nation. And with being a sovereign nation, that means you have the right to implement laws that you feel are beneficial, most beneficial to the people in your country. And in doing so, you bring it about through a vote. Now, they have a parliament which is set up to vote on these specific issues. And that is what the definition of democracy is supposed to be. Just like in this country where we go and we elect, or we at least we are told that we are electing leaders and politicians, and we vote, and then that vote gets counted, and then the results are of what supposed to be what the people voted for. Well, in this situation, there was a lot of disgruntled leaders around the world, specifically in the United States, who literally threatened to wage war against Uganda for their position that they've taken, their cultural position that they've taken, and what they feel protects their citizens of their country. And initially, in looking into this, I wanted to actually take a look at the actual bill itself, not really any propaganda that's being pushed by a mainstream media outlet, but I wanted to see what was actually documented in the bill, in the act in Uganda. And initially it was hard to find it when I was trying to sift through all of the propaganda that's out there. So just to show you an example of this is a Reuters article that was written about this that was released on May 30th. And here it says Uganda enacts harsh anti-LGBTQ law, including death penalty. Now, initially, in reading this and from the news reports that came out, a natural reaction to this will make most people believe that people are being executed or have the threat of being executed for identifying as being LGBTQ. Once again, if that is Uganda's position, then that's their position, and they're a sovereign nation and they can implement the laws they want to implement. But in going through this article, I went into this article, and here it says Uganda's president Yoweri Museveni signed one of the world's toughest anti-LGBTQ laws. Now, initially looking at this link, I said, okay, wow, I found the source that I can actually reference very quickly. So I'm thinking that this link is going to take me to the actual laws that were passed. But unfortunately, it didn't do that. This took me to another Reuters article in which, when I clicked on this, now I'm going down the loophole of more propaganda. So it says Uganda's parliament passes harsh anti-LGBTQ bill, mostly unchanged. Okay, so this one was released on May 2nd. So it's taking me to an older article about a month ago. So as I go through this article, I'm thinking that, okay, maybe there has to be a link in this article that's going to show me the official document that was put out by Parliament concerning this issue. So I'm reading this first paragraph again. It says Uganda's parliament on Tuesday passed one of the world's strictest anti-LGBTQ bills, mostly unchanged, including provisions for long jail terms and the death penalty. After the president requested some parts of the original legislation be toned down. So I see original legislation. I see there's a link here for original legislation. So one would believe that this original legislation link is going to take me to the original document. And once again, I click on this link, and now I'm in a Reuters rabbit hole. They're not going to actually show me the source that I can read for myself. They're going to give me the propaganda to guide my mind into a direction that they want to control my thought process and going. So I had to back out of Reuters and go to Google. So I go to Google, I type in Anti Homosexuality Act 2003, and then I end up on this Wikipedia page. And it's interesting that, a lot of these Wikipedia pages are becoming live reactions now. People go in and they create these Wikipedia pages with detailed information a lot of times in real time and as soon as a lot of this is happening. So there's a section in here that talks about the provisions in the passage. And if you know anything about Wikipedia, information that's on Wikipedia actually is supposed to contain a cited source. If it doesn't, then it'll say um, citation needed or sources needed. I can't remember the exact language, but essentially, whenever you read something here and then you see a footnote here, this is actually linking you to a source. So I started reading these provisions to try to get a better understanding of what exactly was in the bill. So we'll go through some of these provisions here, but I'm also going to take you to the actual document itself, and I'm going to link two documents down in the description that deal with the most recent bill that passed, and also the explanations by Parliament on why it was necessary for them to go through the democratic process, which is what the United States constantly preaches and wanting to, spread democracy around the world. But it's funny, whenever democracy doesn't go the way that they want it to go, then they proceed to try to overpower or inflict their beliefs on other people.
Mhm.
And a lot of us have also now started to assume that same role. And this is something that is ancient, dealing with Europeans going into various countries. And when they don't agree with the way that the country is ran or they want something out of that country, resources or whatever, then they will attack that country's belief system, attack that country's culture, attack that country's mores and people's way of life, and try to uh, transform those people into doing what they want them to do. And in most cases, it's not always necessarily about what exists out there as far as culture. Is more so connected to what they have control over. And if it's something that they want,
Mhm.
then they're gonna attack it. And we've seen that, with religion. We've seen, going back to the Roman Crusades, going back to, Europeans going around the world colonizing various countries. We've seen this happen before. But here it says that on February 28th, Parliament granted Asuman and excuse me, I'm pronouncing the brother's last name incorrectly, Basalerwa, leave to introduce the Anti Homosexuality Bill. The memorandum to the bill stated that its object was to establish a comprehensive and enhanced legislation to protect the traditional family by the prohibition of same sex relationships and their promotion or recognition, strengthening measures to deal with emerging threats to the traditional heterosexual family, protecting Ugandan culture from sexual rights activists seeking to impose their values of sexual promiscuity, and protecting children and youth who are made vulnerable to sexual abuse through homosexuality and related acts. Now, if you go and read the actual document they produced, which I'm going to link down in the description, they state in that document that they were experiencing a lot of issues with the school systems promoting homosexuality, with um, foreign supporters and people who are in the country um, promoting homosexuality to the youth, or in their words, grooming the youth to accept and participate in homosexuality. But here it says that the bill, as introduced, defined the offense of homosexuality to include various forms of gay sex, touching another person with the intention of committing the act of homosexuality, and holding out as a lesbian, gay, transgender, queer, or any other sexual or gender identity that's contrary to binary categories of male and female. Provided for 10 years imprisonment on conviction of the offense of homosexuality, defined the offense of aggravated homosexuality to be committed by A when A when A, excuse me, by A when A has gay sex with B and A has HIV, is a guardian or parent of B, has authority of control over B, has a disability, A is a serial offender, or A causes B to use anything with intent to stupefy or overpower, B, to enable any person to have unlawful carnal connection with any person of the same sex. So before I read up all of these, essentially, and like I said, I'm going to link it in the description, and I'm also going to put up the original document. But essentially, what Uganda was doing was strengthening the 2014 Anti Homosexuality Act, because they saw that with the way it was already criminalized, it was not strong enough based off of the changes they were seeing happen in their country. Because there is a concerted effort and an agenda by the West, which has been stated publicly and in documentation by the Biden administration, to openly push homosexuality. And the ultimate goal is for homosexuality to be decriminalized across the African continent. So, by them seeing this, they strengthen the rules, at the same time taking into consideration of the protection of people who would be falsely convicted or people who simply identified as LGBTQ. So initially, they had provisions in the bill that would criminalize someone if they just merely identified as being LGBTQ, but they stepped back and said we can't criminalize somebody just for identifying. They have to actually go out and commit the act. So that would be similar to me saying, "Hey, I'm a bank robber, but I've never robbed any banks." I can't be arrested just for saying I'm a bank robber. There has to be evidence or something that would lead the authorities to believe that I'm actually guilty or I have actually participated in robbing a bank. So with that, they introduced the death penalty as a maximum, again, a maximum penalty for specific acts of homosexuality, which they call aggravated homosexuality. Essentially, aggravated homosexuality is someone who is raping someone who is raping a child or committing a homosexual act on a child, which would be pedophilia, someone who is taking advantage of a disabled person, a mentally ill person, an elder, someone who is over the age of 75, someone who knowingly has HIV and is going around spreading it through acts of homosexuality, someone who is a repeat or what they call a serial offender of these acts. So they propose that if you participate in aggravated homosexuality, then you would then be liable, if found convicted, to potentially face the death penalty. Now, in Uganda in itself, rape is already, prior to this act being passed, rape already was a crime where you could potentially face the death penalty. So, what the West did is they played on the death penalty aspect of it, and they gaslit the situation to make people believe that they were strictly going to be killing people because they say that they were gay
Hmm.
or LGBTQ or whatever, right? Now, again, we're focusing on Uganda's sovereignty. Me, my personal position, I don't agree with homosexuality because as an African, I do not feel it is a natural part of our culture. People can have the opinions that they want to have and voice those wherever they want to voice them. But on this channel, that is my position. And in regards to whether I believe the laws are violating someone's human rights, well, we have to ask the question, who defined what human rights are? Because is this a human right or is it a human wrong? Everybody's culture is not the same. And if giving someone the death penalty for this is considered to be a human rights violation, what about the other human rights violations that are committed not by other countries, but in the United States that are not given the same attention as the attention that they're putting on this particular bill? And we're going to get into that. But I'm going to pull up the actual document now, and we're going to link it down in the description. In this document, it actually breaks down in the different sections the interpretation, as you can see in section 1. In section 2, you see the offense of homosexuality. So it breaks down what is considered to be a homosexual act. 3, it breaks down what's aggravated homosexuality. 4, punishment for a child offender. And I'm not going to read the whole thing because you can go and actually click on this and read through it for yourself. But in section 3, and this is specific to what was considered to be punishable by the death penalty, or what could be punished by the death penalty.
I think that doesn't the law say up to the death penalty? I mean, it's like
Correct. Yeah,
10
up to
years, 20 years, 30 years, life or whatever, and then up to the
yeah,
death penalty.
up to the death. So the death penalty would be the maximum that you could receive. And Uganda does not have a mandatory death penalty sentencing. So they removed that in 2019. And of course, Biden and all of these other presidents, they know this, and they know that Uganda rarely ever executes anyone. In fact, since the country gained its independence, it's only been 51 people who have been actually executed after being sentenced to the death penalty. So if we actually look at the statistics, which you're going to look at in regards to the egregiancy of the death penalty, the United States has executed far more people than Uganda. Here it says aggravated homosexuality, a person who commits the offense of homosexuality in any of the circumstances specified in subsection 2 commits the offense of aggravated homosexuality and is liable on conviction to suffer death. That means there's a possibility that if you convicted, you could be sentenced to the death penalty. The circumstances referred to in subsection 1 are where A, the person against whom the offense is committed is a child. So that means the number one priority in this is protecting their children. B, the offender is a parent, guardian, or relative of the person against whom the offense is committed. C, the person against whom the offense is committed contracts a terminal illness as a result of the sexual act. Once again, if you are spreading HIV to people through these homosexual acts, then you could receive the death penalty. You're already essentially killing other people based on your act and knowing that you're spreading this disease. So why should it be a human rights offense if you receive the death penalty for that? D, the offender is a serial offender. E, the offender is a person of authority over the person against whom the offense is committed. F, the person against whom the offense is committed is a person with a disability or suffers a disability as a result of the sexual act. G, the person against whom the offense is committed is a person with mental illness or suffers a mental illness as a result of the sexual act. H, the person against whom the offense is committed is of advanced age. So that means if you're going out, you're disrupting an elder, somebody who can't defend themselves with a homosexual act, then you could be liable to the death penalty. Now, in African culture, we protect our elders, we protect our children. So in Uganda, they're basically saying we're not going to allow this type of behavior to negatively affect an elder or a child. I, the sexual act is committed against a person by means of threats, force, fear of bodily harm, duress, or undue influence, intimidation of any kind, or through misrepresentation as to the nature of the act. All right. So essentially, if you're going out and you're committing rape, forcing somebody against their will, then yes, you could face the death penalty for that. J, the person against whom the offense is committed was at the time the offense was committed unconscious or in an altered state or consciousness due to the influence of medicine, drugs, alcohol, or any other substance that impaired his or her judgment. So this is what Uganda is saying the death penalty could apply to. Nowhere in here does it say a person who identifies as LGBTQ. Nowhere in here does it even say a person who commits a homosexual act with another homosexual. Now, you can receive prison time for that, but they're not saying that you're going to receive the death penalty. You could receive the death penalty for that, unless you are just a serial offender. So if you go to prison, get out, and you keep repeating the same offense, then obviously the prison time wasn't enough for you to correct your actions. Now, in terms of another point that I wanted to make, now that we've actually looked at the official document, I was going to show you another document. I'll link this document in the description, but this is actually the official report of the Sectoral Committee on Legal and Parliamentary Affairs of the Anti Homosexuality Bill 2003. So this is them actually discussing as Parliament the meetings of that took place and why they introducing the bill in the first place, what people in Parliament thought about it, some of the objections to it, some of the things that they're wishing or they trying to accomplish in the bill. And here you can see also the signatures of people within Parliament. I'll link this down in the description for the people that want to actually go out and read this. Right. But they also talk about how Uganda, according to their constitution, homosexuality is not recognized as a right under the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda. Once again, the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda, not the U.S. Constitution. The United States Constitution does not apply to other countries. It applies to the United States. The Constitution of the Republic of Uganda applies to Uganda. And they, as a sovereign nation, they have the right and the authority to enact the laws that they wish to enact. Now, if we look at, let me see if I can pull it up here. If we look at this article that was released in USA Today, here it says that Where it's a crime to be gay, a visual guide to where LGBTQ rights are repressed. So they give this map here, and you can see the majority of the countries that criminalize homosexuality on the African continent. One argument that people will always try to make is they'll always say that this is due to colonialism. Well, if colonialism introduced these laws, then why isn't it penalized in any of the colonial countries themselves? So I would more so say that the reason why it's penalized in these countries is because the people in these countries culturally do not identify with it. And it's a historical thing that they don't identify with prior to colonization. Because let's say if the British colonized Africa and they colonized Uganda, Ghana, Kenya, and they came in and introduced these laws, then we would find similar laws in the UK, but we don't because culturally they agree with these practices, whereas these African nations and many of these Asian nations do not. But if we go down here where it talks about countries that already have the death penalty for same-sex acts, Brunei, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right. I don't know if it's Brunei or Brunei, Iran, Mauritania, Nigeria, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Uganda, and Yemen. So prior to Uganda passing its bill, all these other countries already had existing laws on the books for this, but you don't see the same outrage. So specifically, we know that the U.S. is targeting Uganda not because of this law being passed, but because they know that this is easy lunch money for them. They know that they can go in and bully Uganda economically into changing its laws, which will then set a precedence on the African continent for other African countries to follow suit. Excuse me. So, in looking at this, when we go in and we look at the death penalty itself, which is the main argument that a lot of these other countries had against what Uganda is doing, let's take a look at let's take a look now at the country the countries, excuse me, where the death penalty is often actually executed. I didn't even realize that you had dropped off there, brother,
Yeah, it's been going out in and out quite a bit.
because I couldn't see the screen. I was just talking away.
Oh yeah, man. No, you were rolling. You know
Let me go
you were
back.
you were rolling. It's you know it it's these laws have these types of laws have been on the books in places, for example, like Saudi Arabia,
Mm-hmm.
for years, and
Exactly.
and they you don't see them railing against the Saudis because, quite frankly, they need Saudi Arabia, on in numerous ways, not just oil, but in numerous ways. So they're not going to, you don't see Biden and Harris, so and the others, Obama when he was president over there railing against the Saudis, so, or even Qatar, as small as it is. So it's
Mm-hmm.
clearly it's clearly all about power. But I think more so than anything, I think it's the fact that Africans are producing children at higher rates than anyone else on the planet, and that is a concern for a shrinking European population. The Europeans have done things, not in Europe and in the United States or in North America, that have contributed to their population decline. And I think this is why one reason why I believe civil unrest is brewing in this country over these issues like um, same sex marriage and um, the different things that are being used in schools for education, abortion. All of these things have reduced the white population, the aging white population of the United States, and I think they're desperate to try to do the same thing, in Africa. And it's interesting as in terms of cultural imperialism, they've been very effective in terms of Christianity and in terms of the educational systems in Africa, which all of them should be African centered, but many of them are heavily influenced by Eurocentric ideas and Eurocentric history, for example. But this one area culturally, that is, I think Africans view it as the defense of their families. And I think they would eventually also view it as a necessity for their genetic survival. The
Mm.
Europeans haven't been able to penetrate, that particular area in several countries. Now they have been successful in South Africa and some other countries. But go ahead, brother. You got a lot of information there, and I think this death penalty information you're getting ready to drop there is necessary. Go right ahead.
Definitely. No, thank you for adding that. And when we look at countries that have actually executed on the death penalty, now we're not just discussing uh, what laws exist, because you can have a law, but you can have low crime rates. Just like we know in Singapore, when that American, I can't remember his name, went over to Singapore and vandalized some property over there, and he was convicted and sentenced to being caned. And there was this outcry by the American government that the penalty was too egregious, and the government said no. This is a reason why our crime rates are low, because we have laws that deter people from committing these acts. And you could be a social scientist and try to argue, whether strict laws do that or not. But I mean, their evidence is that their crime rate is low.
Mm,
So he actually had to go through with that caning. But in terms of the people who have the laws on the books and the people who actually execute, let's take a look at the total number of executions in 2022. Now, this is according to deathpenaltyinfo.org, which I believe the information is sourced from amnesty.org, that does a lot of research in this area. And China is at the top of the list with over 1,000 executions. Now, these are executions that are verified. Some are unable to be verified because some countries don't report. And I don't know if this number on China is a propaganda piece, because they're trying to raise as much propaganda as they can about China from a negative aspect, due to the power struggle that the West is having with China becoming a superpower. Um, but you also see Iran here, 576 plus executions. You see Saudi Arabia, Egypt. So off of the top right here, these top four countries consist of mostly Asiatic people.
mm,
All right. Then the fifth country, the United States, which had 18 in 2022. Ironically, 15 of those were white men and 10 of them were black men. You had, Asian, and they even are still executing Native Americans. I can believe that there was one Native American who was executed with the death penalty in 2022, I
Mm.
didn't even think that it was enough Native Americans for at least one person to even fall within the category of being convicted of a crime and then sentenced to death. I mean, based on what happened to the Native Americans, they should have some clause in the Constitution where the death penalty doesn't even apply to them.
Yeah. Killed in estimates anywhere between 13, 15, 20 million people, since Europeans arrived in this country now that they call the United States. That many indigenous people were killed by the European settlers in this country.
And you look down the list: Singapore, Kuwait, Somalia. So these are the top countries. Nowhere do you see Uganda on this list in 2022. Nowhere. But these other leaders around the world are worried about Uganda potentially putting people to death or executing people. Now, if we take into consideration the extrajudicial killings that take place, then we're talking about government, state sponsored killings that are not, these are not murders by citizens or people against each other. We're talking about state sponsored murders, executions that take place without due process, without a trial, without a jury, without a conviction. And if we look at that, the United States in itself had 1,200 people killed by police just in 2022 alone. And this is a number that's steady growing every year. This is according to police violencereport.org.
Mm.
1,200 people killed. So if we add on the 18 people that were executed, you have essentially 1,218 executions by the United States government.
Yeah. Now, some of those obviously would be legitimate in terms of just how violent the society is. Um, what I'm most interested in when I see that statistic, those numbers, is the number of unarmed people who were killed, and I don't have those numbers in front of me, but it's still there is still a lot of people being killed, by and like you say, the numbers are increasing, and I think given the fact that crime is out of control in this country, I think it's going to continue to increase. Crime
Mm-hmm.
plus all of the various political and racial tensions that are emerging, and other tensions.
Yeah, and making that point, essentially, what I'm saying is that out of this 1,200, and I don't have that breakdown that you stated, but out of that 1,200, people were killed without due process, without a
Yeah.
trial,
Hmm.
without their constitutional rights, which is the definition of a human rights violation. But there's no outcry from other nations and presidents around the world regarding this particular issue.
Mm.
Now, I've heard former leaders from countries like Iran talk about police brutality in the United States and condemn the United States for these practices. But the United States has its own internal issues that it should be more concerned with. When you have senators like Ted Cruz and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and President Biden and all of these other politicians that will jump up to gaslight a bill that was passed over 4,000 miles away in another country that they have no authority over. But right here in their own country, more people were executed by the death penalty in the United States than in Uganda. And people are killed extrajudiciously in the United States, uh, which would put it on the same level as the executions that took place in China.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, the United States itself has no moral authority on any issue that I know of, none. Um, the Equal Justice Initiative has, I think, now documented over 4,400 lynchings of African people in the United States between the Compromise of 1877 and 1950. That's just through 1950. Over 4,400 extrajudicial killings, which we call lynchings.
Mhm.
Biden himself, he's trying to rebrand himself, but the only way to rebrand himself is to overturn at least some sections of his 1994 crime bill. I'm gonna read this. The federal, here we're talking about the United States, the federal death penalty was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in Furman versus Georgia in 1972. When it was reinstated in 1988, only those convicted of murder in federal court, only those convicted of murder in federal court while engaging in containing criminal enterprise were eligible for the death penalty. The 1994 crime bill, this is the Biden crime bill, marshaled through the Congress by uh, New Jim Crow Joe Biden and signed by Sick Willie Bill Clinton. The 1994 crime bill changed that. Among the law's many provisions was the Federal Death Penalty Act, which expanded the law to make 60 crimes. Expanded the law to make 60 crimes, including drug crimes that do not involve homicide eligible for the death penalty. Crimes could fall under three broad categories: homicide offenses, espionage and treason, and non homicidal narcotics offenses. So there were four prisoners convicted after 1994. They received the death penalty, and they were they had not committed crimes that would have gotten the death penalty prior to Joe Biden's crime bill. So Joe Biden allows his crime bill allowed for people to be killed for committing what they call a non-homicidal narcotics offense.
Mm.
So of all people, this guy would be one of the least qualified people to be criticizing any country for
Mm.
anything. They added 60 new crimes that could be punishable by the death penalty in the 1994 crime bill. So,
Mm.
see, this this
Great point.
this is American. This is why Mama Marimba, Dr. Ani, one of our most brilliant, if not most brilliant ever, scholar, said hypocrisy is a way of life.
Hmm.
They operate based on the rhetorical ethics, saying things purely for the consumption of others that they don't believe in themselves. And then when they have the global economic power that they have, then they are able to impose their will, on countries, for example, like Uganda.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I think it's important for people to understand that when they're dealing with, how things have, unfolded in this country regarding, the killing of, quite frankly, I mean, you throw in all of the Africans who were, killed as a result of chattel slavery and in the Middle Passage. I mean, it's rather the numbers are staggering. Let me put it like
Hmm.
that. The numbers are absolutely staggering. I mean, I this is off topic, but it has been said that if deaths were counted per minute, President Harry Truman, based on dropping the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, would be the greatest mass killer in history if deaths were computed by minute. The number of people who were killed by minute when those bombs were dropped. So,
And
this
it's
we're
it's
dealing.
interesting that you say that because I was talking to somebody last The other day, we posted a video on YouTube, and the title of the video was "Is the U.S. or is NATO and Ukraine leading the world into a nuclear holocaust?" So, a YouTube context link was put under that video describing the word Holocaust and giving a definition of it, dealing with the Jews being killed. And so now they've colonized the term Holocaust, which is actually a Greek term
Mm-hmm.
uh, that goes back to the meaning of people being killed by being burned.
Yeah,
So essentially, what the United States did to Japan was a nuclear holocaust.
it was.
They burned those, blew up and burned those people with the bomb that was dropped.
That's right. You're exactly correct. When you
So they
look at the
can't
when you look at the
monopolize.
etymology, right? The etymology of the word Holocaust.
Yeah, they can't
It means burnt.
monopolize that term. And you would think when it comes to human rights violations that these Zionists or these Jews who are in positions like Anthony Blinken is would be speaking up about what's happening to the Palestinians in Israel
Hmm.
as a number one concern, but there's never any mention of that.
Hmm.
But this has been another edition of African Liberation Media. Brothers and sisters, please leave your comments down in the comment section. If you disagree, leave your comments in the comment section, like this video, or if you don't like it, give it a thumbs down. But the links to those articles will be in the description. Definitely check those out. Until next time, I'll be before Hodier.
Be before the African family.